Okay, everybody, welcome to our wedding lens workshop. Again, I'm Kris Labang, and so we're going to go over wedding lenses, general lenses that wedding photographers use pretty much on a job-to-job basis. For me, primarily, I'm a very specific shooter. The lens for every specific thing that's going on, every specific thing that I want to shoot. I use a lot of primes and I use a lot of zoom lenses. There's a lot of people that kind of weigh either one or the other. They either use a lot of zooms or a lot of primes. I primarily use both, but depending on the situation, what's going on. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to talk today about this. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, the first thing I wanted to talk about is, for the sake of not confusing the hell out of anybody, especially me who's bad at math, we're only going to talk about full frame cameras today. We're not going to talk about crop cameras and on the magnification and all that kind of stuff, because again, I am bad at math. I am sorry. So we're only going to discuss full frame, but there is the equivalent. So what I'm going to be talking about can be applied to the crop sensor cameras. You just got to do some math. Again, not good at it. Going to let you guys do it on your own. So first thing I wanted to talk about, event lenses. Okay, anytime a wedding is an event. Okay, and the things that you do at a wedding is very similar to any other event. You kind of go around and you take pictures, and you have things set up to make the pictures look better. But generally, you're going to have to switch lenses a lot and go around and do certain things. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. Your general basic bag for event lenses, in my personal opinion, is first to start off with is you have your 1635 or your 1424 or 1835, some other equivalent like that. It's a very super wide lens. And then you have your mid-range, your 2470s, and you have your 7200s. This is like your basic kit right here. This would cover everything from your wide shots to your walk-around shots to your very far away shots. And that's what the three ranges are for. Then on top of that, I think what's really important for wedding photographers is to have portrait lenses. Portrait lenses are really important because they have a different look than the zoom lenses. And these are primes or fixed focal length lenses. And I think a general lens everybody should have is like an 85 or a 50. Those are really good lenses. And the last lens we're going to talk about today is macro lenses. Okay? Macro lenses are for getting really close up to your detail shots, like your rings, earrings, centerpieces, or anything really small that looks really tiny if you're taking from too far away. So your macro lenses will take care of anything that you need up close. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is our super wide lenses. Okay? So this is a 14 millimeter shot. Your wide lenses are for showing the epicness of whatever event you're doing. If it's outdoors, if it's indoors, no matter what, you kind of want a lens that's going to encompass everything that's going on. You don't want this to be the only lens that you're using. This is going to look pretty boring if everything's wide and everybody's tiny like this. But this is primarily the kind of lens you want to show off the venue that you're photographing or documenting. Now, this is by no means a portrait lens. You don't want to be doing portraits with this lens. I should have included a sample of this, but the problem with shooting a wide lens as a portrait lens is that the reason what makes wide lenses great is it stretches everything out. So if you put people in there, it's going to stretch them out. So especially if you got a bride that's very self-conscious about her arms and you put her in one of these, it's going to make her arm look like the Hulk, and yeah, we're not gonna have a very happy bride with a bunch of wide pictures. So this is primarily for all your wide shots. Anything that's too big for you to grab with, if you find there's a lot of action going on and you want to capture it all, but your lens is too short, that's what you need a super wide lens for. Or again, the epic shots like this. These really great wide shots here are really important to, kind of show off the feel of whatever venue that you're shooting at. Okay? Definitely not a normal lens kind of deal with like a 50 mil. It really brings in, it increases the scope of whatever it is you're shooting. If you got a nice church, you can bring it all in there, and it makes this really grand effect, this really epic grand effect. This is the same 14 mil on a walkout over here. As you can see, everybody's in there. You can see everybody, congratulate them and looking. And this is a good walkout shot because everybody's paying attention, not on their phones. I hate that when I get pictures and everybody's on their phones. Oh yeah, congratulations. Those make really terrible walkout photos. So this one turned out really great, as you can see. And the fact that everybody's in it, it really brings the picture together in terms of people, hey, they just got married, they're walking out, and it helps tell the story over here. Yeah? So these are your wide lenses, okay? Now, when you have a reception going on or an event, when you're walking around, let's say a crowd like this, in a room like this, if I'm walking through the crowd over here, the wide lens probably a little bit too much. You want to focus on whatever it is going on. Most events, people are talking, they're networking or doing some kind of stuff. They're all socializing and whatnot, and you want to capture stuff like that. That's what you need the mid-range for, the 24-70s. Now the 24-70s, a good lens, mainly because it has a little bit of wide in there. If you're going around and somebody asks for a group shot, you don't have to change out lenses, as well as the 70 millimeter, and that end is a very nice range to get where it separates your subject very nicely from the background. The 2.8s are really great because they can separate more than a 5.6 lens. So your 24-70 is a very good walk-around lens. I think this is really important for people that have to do a lot of moving around through groups, and especially especially at weddings. More often than not, hey, can I get a picture of my friends here? They came in from, California. Instead of fumbling around, oh, good, I got the lens on already. You don't have to worry about it. So this is why zooms are really great for such things. Anytime you have a zoom lens, though, there's going to be a trade-off in terms of quality, which I'll get to in a minute. Zoom lenses are not as sharp as primes. There are actually some really, really sharp zoom lenses out there, but overall the quality is not as sharp as a prime. There's more glass involved, more attention paid to the specific millimeter that they're shooting on a prime. So more often than not, you're going to get more sharper lenses on a prime lens, fixed focal length lens. But your mid-range, again, going back to your mid-range, it's a very solid walk-around lens. This is the 24-70. That's the kind of lens that you guys want to walk around in. Walk around a crowd, walk around a room. If you're doing a parade downstairs, that's a good lens to catch the wide a little bit, go up and catch someone talking on the side or catching candy, things like that. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the 7200. Okay. Now this is your on your longer focal length here. The 7200 is pretty much a wedding photographer's best friend right here. This can do very long shots on the 200 millimeter end, and it can still do some portraits on the 70 millimeter end, or even 200 if you can go that far back. The separation is really nice, as you can see. Very, very nice separation from the background, giving the subject very strong isolation. This lens is mainly used for long distances. Ceremonies are great for this lens because it's more often than not, you're not going to be right up to the couple during the ceremony taking pictures. That'd be a little awkward. So the 7200 is a really important lens to use, or any long lens that you want to use for shooting. Particularly the 7200 is good because of the 2.8. Now this is important if you folks are shooting in very dimly lit situations, churches, a situation like this. We only got this one light on me. 7200 at 2.8 probably do a lot better than a 5.6 lens, which I'll get to the differences in a minute. But yeah, your 7200 is a very good longer range lens. This is what's going to get you your close-up shots during the ceremony, so that you don't have to be intrusive in the shot and make it really awkward for people. Oh, look at my son getting married. What's that guy in the black just walking up to them? Oh, it's so awkward. So that's why you want a nice long lens like that. Now, why 2.8? 2.8 is really important because you have a lot of low light situations in weddings or any event period. Another thing for 2.8 is the separation, the subject separation here. If you were at my lighting class last week, bounce is a lot easier with a wide open aperture. If you have something like a 5.6, the light has to be a lot stronger in order for it to hit its subject, and that's going to make it harder for bounce light to get in there. So the 2.8 is really important. Does 2.8, is it really necessary? No, it's not. I actually keep a 7300 in my bag for situations where I want to get a little closer, but it's a little bit too far away. I mainly use the 7300 for outdoor use, beaches and whatnot like that. I won't take that into a church because it's way, way too high on the aperture to be able to get enough light in churches, even with the high amount of ISO that most of the cameras, the modern cameras have these days. It's still a little bit too difficult to get that in there. But overall, the ranges. So generally, this is what most event shooters buy: 14-24 or Canon 16-35, the 24-70 and the 7200. Now, these are all 2.8 lenses. They're all very expensive. They do have the sort of secondary lenses like the 7200, the 24-105, I believe. These are all variable aperture lenses, meaning that they change when you zoom, maybe like a 3.5, 5.6. Now, the only problem with this is that they're not very good in low light. But these lenses are fine. As the range is what's important. As long as you have your wide covered, your mid covered, and your long covered, I think that's really important. So building up your kit, if you want to, save some bucks, is not a problem buying a lens like a 7300 or 24-105. Just remember that it's not as good in low light. There are other little cons to owning a lens like that. Like the 7200 is not a very heavy lens. So when you're shooting pictures at, let's say, 300 millimeters, you might experience a lot of shake because it's not as heavy and doesn't weigh you down like the 7200 does. The 7200 will weigh you down because there's so much glass in there, and you won't get too much shake. But it's 70 to 300, it's very light. So what happens is you sometimes, even if you have very good light, you need to bump up your shutter quite a bit because you'll have a little bit of handshake in there. And when you're at 300 millimeter, how many of you guys ever looked through a telescope or binoculars? Raise your hand. What happens to the image when you're looking through it? It's shaky, right? And no matter how hard you try and stabilize yourself, it's still a little bit shaky, right? Now, if you translate that into cameras, it's the same thing. There's that little bit of shake at that long millimeter is very noticeable, and it'll affect your photos, especially at low shutter speeds. So this is why the 70 to 300 is not always the best lens for shooting, especially in low light. That little bit of shake over there causes a huge problem in terms of being able to stabilize shots, even at 125. A general rule of thumb when you're taking pictures, especially with longer focal lengths, you want to have your shutter speed to match your focal length, and that'll kind of help you minimize the shake. Now, 7300 with a 5.6, that's going to really bring down that shutter speed number if its situation is not lit enough, and that's where the shake becomes a big problem. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is portrait lenses. Okay. Now, well, this is actually still the 7200 here. I still use this for the family portraits here. In fact, I'm sorry, I still got a few 7200 shots here. So this is not only for the event itself. This makes a great portrait lens in itself. When you have big groups like this, the 2.8 is very good on the focus. When you're shooting a 85 or a 50 at 1.4, that 1.4, that field of focus is very thin. So sometimes you might have problems. If you have big groups where you have 2 rows and you're shooting 1.4, you're going to have a big problem with that. So the 28, the 7200 2.8 does really nice in terms of the field of focus. You get really nice facial focus in there, and you don't have to really try so hard like you have to do with a 1.4. And so all these shots are done with a 7200. Nice, as you can see, the separation. These are all at 200, by the way, too. All nice separation from the background to the subject here. Okay. So next thing I want to talk about is the portrait lenses. And this is generally the 50 and the 85. Now, why you want to use this? Better low light performance. This was after sunset, and this is a 85 1.4, and I think I was shooting at 1600 ISO. This is on quite an old camera too, but I mean, it still looks like the light is up. It's probably overcast. Doesn't quite look like the sun is set yet, right? Still pretty good. This is the important part of these kind of lenses, is that it lets in a lot of light, okay? Which is really important when you're shooting events, and you can't use flash. A lot of churches you go to, you won't be able to use flash. 2.8s come in handy for that too. More often than not during the ceremony, most churches won't let you use flash. I can't think of a single church that's going to let you use a flash inside of the church during the actual ceremony. It's a little too obtrusive to the couple, or distracting for the people that are there as well. So as you can see, very, very low light. Again, this is after sunset, 85, 50. These shots here are very low shutter speed shots, but still you're able to bring out a nice crisp image if you got the right technique here. I think I was shooting at 1/60th with the 85 here at 1600 ISO. The sun had set way below, and in fact, this kind of, I think her father is an amateur photographer, and I made him nervous because I wasn't using flash. And when I showed him the pictures, he's like, "Oh, never mind. I'm gonna go back to my drink now." So I was happy that the dad who takes pictures approved, because yeah, I was really making him nervous, the fact that I wasn't using flash for this. But as you can see, shooting in low light is very important. Another thing that's really important is the subject separation. You know, as you can see here, the bride's face, very focal. And she really liked the makeup artist that she had for this, for her day. And I wanted to include her, but I didn't want her to be so like in there. You know, I still wanted to have the center of focus to be the bride. But as you can see here, very, very strong focus on the face. Huge separation, even from her shoulder, and then more so on top of the person in the back there, okay? This is why 50s and 85s are really important. You're not gonna quite get the same separation as you was with a 2.8 or a 7200. The 2.8 makes a very different feel to your shots. You can step back with your 7200, but again, the more you zoom in, the higher your shutter speed needs to go in order to minimize the shake. So 50s, 85s, these are really relatively easy to handle, you know? Another shot right here. I think this is with the 85, just focusing right on her eyelash. You already see the depth of field dropping past her cheek. Her earrings are blurry, the flower in her hair, her veil in the back. So these kind of lenses are very good with subject isolation. It doesn't, even though it's a portrait lens, it's not just like a full-on, you know, hi, how do you do kind of portrait. You can use these for these kind of detail kind of portraits, I like to call them. You know, this is mainly to, it wasn't color to show off her makeup, but this particular shot I liked in black and white as well, so I switched it. Another 85 shot. No, actually, yeah, this is another 85 shot. Again, subject separation. That's what's important about these lenses and what's great about them. All these are shot at 1.4 or 1.8. So this walking shot here, one thing about shallow lenses when you're shooting at 1.4 or 1.8, it's really, really tricky on the focus. It takes a lot of practice. You need to know your camera very well. If you don't know how your camera works specifically in focus, you'll find out right away when you use a 1.4 because your focus needs to be pinpoint. It needs to be really on it. And if it's not quite there, you'll be able to see problems. You'll focus on something like this and you'll just catch the back of their heads in focus and their noses will be blurry and their eyes will be a little bit blurry. Or you might catch the flowers accidentally and everything else is blurry. When you shoot that shallow, it's really tricky and needs a lot of practice to get there. But once you get it, it's not bad. It's mainly about knowing your camera, in my opinion. Not necessarily the lens. You have to know your camera. Nowadays, every camera comes with micro adjusts. You can fine tune the focusing on it so that it works better for situations like this. But yeah, mostly it's about the camera, not necessarily about the people. And that's one thing I think people get a little discouraged when they're using 1.4 lenses. I can't get the focus the way I want it. It's not necessarily your fault. It's more often the camera or just your knowledge of the camera itself. Focus points, knowing what kind of, if it's continuous focus, all that kind of stuff like that, all that stuff makes a difference. So again, knowing your camera is way more important for these situations using shallow lenses than actual technique. A lot of it is knowing the camera. Okay, the 50 and the 85 I don't just use for portraits, I use them a lot for detail shots. I think my 50 mil I use probably 90% of my shots on a wedding is detail shots like this. Okay? Very, very nice, again, subject isolation. You know, you want this nice light and nice background, but you want it to be distracting. You want the focus to be on the shoes. So 50 and an 85 does really nice, again, for subject isolations like this. You know? Another shot of the groom. This one is right tack on his eye. You can't see it that well in here, but his hands are slightly out of focus. And his eyeball right there is really, really sharp. Draws the attention right to the eye. Okay. Again, very, very, very specific subject isolation. These long lenses too are really great for aisle shots. Churches again that are not lit very well, 1.4s do really, really nice. Okay. A lot of my shooting is about subject isolation. I really like blurring everything out and just having it there but not as distracting. I just want the couple to be there and to be the center of attention. Yeah. So this shot right here is interesting because the light or the background, the foreground here was the trees, and then we have the background that was more blurred out. This is a technique called foreground, midground, background. It's a way to make your images pop for 2D images, because basically that's what we're shooting in 2D. So this gives it a little three-dimensionality. I can't pronounce that word very well. Sorry, excuse me. But yeah, this is another reason why I like 1.4 lenses. They really separate nicely and can, you know, really put a three-dimensional look in your shot like this. You know? Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about this, it's portrait lenses like an 85 is a lot easier to work with than a 7200. When you have a 7200, it's meant to shoot far. An 85, you can actually go a lot closer in terms of a minimum focus distance. So another reason why 85s and 50s are good, especially for portraits, is the working distance is nice. If you're too close on a 7200, you might not get the shot that you need in terms of focus. You can zoom in, but again, it has a different look as well, the 2.8 versus the 1.4. Yeah. Now, one thing to note when you shoot on shallow lenses like this, 85s, 50s, especially the ones that they have these days, especially Canon, when you have, in order to get those low numbers, the 1.4, the 1.2s, the 1.8, you kind of need a lot of glass. And I hear a lot of people complain about, like specifically Canon's 1.2. The 85, a lot of people, oh, it's a little too slow. One thing you got to imagine is it's a huge piece of glass. In order to get the motor to focus quick enough around the ring, you need a lot of time for it to do that, because the motor is, it's only so small inside the lens, right? When you have a big piece of glass like that, that's a huge radius for the motor to work on. And all the motors are generally the same. So this is the reason why the lens focus is a little slow. As long as you understand that and you're okay with it, you don't have to worry about that. But just understand when you're using, anytime you use these big lenses, they might focus a little bit longer than your smaller lenses, your kit lenses, your more compact consumer lenses. Using these lenses are a big difference when you're shooting. Don't let it discourage you if you don't get the shots the way you would. Just learn to work around it. You know? Okay. Now, are 1.2s, 1.4s necessary? No, they're not. Any of these shots, can you guys identify like the shots like these? You guys think this is a 1.4 or 1.8? It's actually a 1.8. I broke my 1.4 at one wedding, and the next day I had another wedding, and I went down to a used camera shop and found a 1.8, and I was like, okay, this is all I got. I got to get it, because there's no way I'm getting a 1.4. Best Buy was sold out. I couldn't get a 1.4 lens. And basically, I bought the 1.8, and I was surprised at the quality the 1.8s have. So don't be afraid of checking out 1.8 lenses too. A lot of it is relative. A lot of it is personal preference. If you shoot with a 1.8 or 1.4 and you find that the 1.4 doesn't do much of a difference to you, then the 1.8 is fine. If you want more sharpness, if you can actually see it, 1.4s are better for you. But it's all relative. So a lot of people I know, I've come to find too, that they actually shoot on 1.8s. The 1.4s, not necessarily that much more worth it for those, you know, couple extra $100. You know, 1.8s do a fine job. Yeah. Now, another thing I want to talk about here is macro lenses. Okay. Now, macro lenses are important too, because you need to do a lot of detail shots as wedding photographers. You're documenting someone's day. Okay. You need to document the garter, the rings, the weird underwear that they wear on the day of, whatever it says bride all over it. Actually, they don't wear those. They just buy them and then they just make me take pictures of them. Macro shots are really specific to close-up photography. You know, you can't really get that close unless the lens is designed that way, which is why the macro is very important and a very kind of in its own niche, macro photography. Now, I know a lot of people swear by their 100 mils, but I actually use a 60 mil, and I have a 100 mil, but I rarely even use it. I like the working distance with the 60, and that's the important thing that you want to have. On the wedding day, 100 millimeter, sometimes I'm fussing with the focal distance, and it's because, again, 2.8, 100 millimeter, that field of focus is so shallow. Any little bit of movement I make might make you out of focus, and just a tad bit out of focus is really going to ruin your composition a lot. So I actually like using 60 mil. I've played with the 50 mil for the Canon Unfortunately, the reproduction is not 1:1, it's 1:2, so you won't get as close. So Canon guys more often are going to tend to buy the 100mm because you can get that 1:1 reproduction and get really close. Nikon guys, you can get away with a 60 in my opinion. I really like using the 60. I do use the 100 on occasion, but very rarely do I do it. The 1:1 magnification on the Nikon 60 can get pretty close, so it's really nice to use. But more often than not, you're going to use these for rings and details like this. These lenses are extremely sharp. Therefore, macro work is, you need to have sharp lenses. You know, a lot of people document things with macro lenses, not just people like me. You're talking about historians, you know, people that architecture. So you need a lens that can retain a lot of detail. So the macro lenses are extremely sharp. The Nikon, the Canon 2.5, the 52.5, very sharp lens. Even though it's not a 1:1 magnification, meaning you can't get as close, it's still extremely sharp. But it's not just the rings that you shoot with these. You know, there's other things you can shoot, cakes here. The detail shots are working distance. That's the important thing to realize. A working distance for a macro lens is a lot easier than, let's say, a 50mm, even an 85. Yeah, you can't do too much detail work with a 50 or 85 if you want to get really close. This is a very small cake. It might look big, but it's actually about this tall. So in order to get really close and get the detail on the flowers there, I couldn't do that with a 50, so I had to get the 60 macro out and get a lot closer. So the macro is not just for your tiny little detail shots. You can shoot a lot of other detail shots with it too. Favors, necklaces. This is shot with my 50. I was trying to get away with it. I was like, I'll get it with the 50, and then I was looking at the shot after in my picture. I'm like, no, I think this is too important. I need to get the macro in there because this is a shot of her parents that I need to get. So as you can see, huge difference in magnification in terms of 50mm and a 60 macro. Again, favors here, you can get nice and close. The 50mm again, probably would crop out quite a bit. You'd have a lot more on the surrounding edges for this shot. 85 even more so, you're going to get a lot more on the surrounding edges. Okay. So the macro is really great. Again, not just for rings, a lot of other detail shots that you can get. Invitations, anything like that. Desserts. I like shooting food. I don't know too many people that shoot food at the weddings. I like shooting the food and making my clients salivate after. Like, oh, it's so good that I didn't get to eat because I was too busy talking to people. Yeah. So it's not just any sort of, it's not just specifically jewelry, anything like that. You're going to shoot all your detail shots with the macro. So that rounds out your bag quite evenly, I would say. So you have your wide lenses, your super wide lenses, you have your mid-range, and then you have your really close-in lenses like your 7200s, 7300s, portrait lenses. Again, low light situations. If you're shooting weddings, more often than not, it's going to happen in the evening when you have a reception and you're going to need to let as much light in as you can. So the 1.4s come in really handy in that situation, and then the macro rounds it out for your detail shots. So this is pretty much, yeah, this is pretty much your basic bag for